Now, inter-African money transfers are among the most expensive in the world. That's according to the World Bank. Now, so how can the continent carry out its transactions at cost-effective rates? Ismail Ahmed, founder and CEO of WorldRemit, joins us via Skype from London to shed more light on this. Ismail, thank you so much for taking the time out to join us today.
Thank you.
Now, as a big player in the remittance market, help us understand why it continues to be very expensive here in Africa to transfer money.
Because transactions within Africa are largely cash-based, and therefore, unlike the mobile transfers, which have become digital, so those continue to be very expensive. So the only choices for those who want to send into Africa are either very expensive traditional cash-based remittances or informal networks where businesses and individuals lose money when they use those networks. But that is beginning to change now as part of digitization.
So, but are we seeing are we on the right track or path to seeing a significant drop with digitization?
Yes, and in fact, today we've announced $40 million of investment, and part of our expansion plan is, which the new investment will finance, is to enable individuals and businesses in Africa to send money abroad as simply as sending an instant message using WorldRemit app, and most importantly, the new service we're planning to launch will enable people to send money easily and at low cost within Africa. So that is a new service we're planning to launch soon now. And so the countries in Africa which currently receive remittances through WorldRemit will become send countries where people can send money abroad, accessing our extensive payout network in 148 countries, or conduct cross-border transfers using our app.
Ismail, if I could just come in here, when you say that users who go through your platform will pay less, how much more less? Could you give us an example?
I mean, to give you an example, typically, we have the digital transactions costs are always less than 5%. For a smaller transaction, somebody who's sending $100, they're much cheaper for somebody who's sending like $1,000. Those could be even sometimes less than 1%. Today, in some of the inter-Africa corridors, you're talking about fees and foreign exchange charges, which account for as much as 20 or sometimes 30% of the send amount. So particularly those smaller businesses which are doing smaller transactions pay prohibitive prices.
Now, I know that because of, the kind of platform that is used to transfer money, digital, and of course, with the use of technology, security becomes an issue. How much of an issue is it for you and other players?
I think this is where digitization has helped transactions to Africa. Globally, we're sending a lot of volume, and we're currently sending close to 1 million transactions a month, and half of those transactions go to Africa, and half of the transactions we pay out in Africa are digital, kind of going to mobile money accounts. So I think what digitization has done is that it's made transactions low cost, more secure, and a lot safer. So, and that is why we're now planning to then send money from Africa, because every day we deal with almost all the African currencies. So because of the fact that we have these currencies, it is easier to reverse transactions and send money from Africa. So certainly digitization is helping the cross-border transactions, because transactions become safer once they become cross-border, because there is an audit trail. And I think it will also help fight the informal networks, which are difficult to follow, where there is no audit trail, and that is what creates often suspicions in relation to cross-border transactions.
Let's talk about your expansion plans. I know that the $40 million that was raised was meant to help drive your next phase of growth. But how significant is the African market to your business in your long-term strategy for the global market?
Our plan is to increase the customers we serve from 2 million to 10 million globally. Half of those will be Africans. So really, Africa is going to be a big part of our future expansion. And already more than half of our transactions to Africa go to, or global transactions go to Africa. And we've already started the process of setting up our offices in Africa. So we've started now in South Africa, Kenya, and we're continuing to build our offices in Africa so that we can send money from Africa rather than send money to Africa.
Now, looking into the future of the remittance market, at what point do you do you think the entire market will be fully digitized in terms of, I know that you've talked about the informal networks that are not regulated, not captured, but at what point do you see the entire market, being digitized?
I think Africa has made more progress than any other continent. I mean, we send money to Latin America, to Asia. Africa is the only market where more than half of our transactions are cashless. And so the new services we're planning would help support the move towards cashless economies in many parts of Africa. And I think that is where Africa is leading the world. Mobile money started 10 years ago in Africa, and I think that is continuing. And I think that is what is really helping us to expand digitization.
Now, I know that you're a big player in the market, but to help us understand how competitive it is.
I think Africa, one of the reasons why cross-border transfers in Africa are very expensive is because there is the traditional players, two large traditional players, historically dominated transactions to Africa and inter-Africa transfers, often through exclusive relationships with some of the biggest banks in Africa. But that is now changing because of mobile money, because of digital players like WorldRemit, which are bringing the cost of sending money lower.
Well, what about regulation? How would you describe the market in terms of regulation?
I think Africa has made a lot of progress in terms of regulation. Many countries have set up a regulatory environment which is conducive to new innovation. I mean, look at, I think, how we benefited from the role of central bank in Kenya, which allowed M-Pesa, 10 years ago, and many countries are following that. I mean, look at the progress Uganda, Ghana, and many other countries have made in terms of enabling mobile money transfers, which is really driving a lot of innovation and growth in Africa.
What about investments? How do potential investors view the market in terms of how lucrative it is and what kind of return on investment that they would get if they do put more funds into it?
Again, I think, digitization is, helping the shift from informal to formal economies. I mean, many countries are now revising their GDPs upwards because we're now seeing many more economic activities which were unmeasured before. And those are really helping African countries to attract investment. I mean, according to the World Bank, in the next few years, we're going to expect to see a significant increase in crowdfunding in Africa. Some estimates say that the size of crowdfunding alone to Africa would be close to $100 billion. In other words, the crowdfunding transfers would become bigger than remittances. So all of these are now possible because of the move towards cashless, because of the digitization, and because of the businesses that have been built on top of the digital transactions.
All right, Ismail, thank you so much for that very insightful look into the remittance market, and of course all the best with your future plans. I've been speaking to Ismail Ahmed, founder and CEO of WorldRemit.